In the midst of the endless sands of the desert, where the sun bleached everything in a harsh golden hue, there lay a village known for its timeless customs and traditions. The people here lived simple lives, bound by the rules of honor, respect, and what was considered virtuous in the eyes of society. Yet there was a girl among them who, despite her beauty, was the subject of scorn. Her name was Layla, and from the moment she opened her eyes, the village knew she would be a woman of rare beauty, with skin as fair as moonlight, hair that flowed like the desert winds, and eyes that sparkled with a mysterious depth. Layla was an enigma. People would stop and stare, whispering behind her back, some in awe, others in fear. But beauty in this village, like everything else, came with its price. While Layla's parents, Abu Omar and Khadija, adored their daughter, they were unable to protect her from the eyes that judged her. Her mother, once a woman of quiet charm, now looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and something more, something that twisted in her chest like a secret she couldn't share. Fatima, a relative from a neighboring village, envied Layla's beauty. Known for her bitterness and sharp tongue, Fatima saw Layla not as a girl to be admired, but as a threat to her own position in the family. "No one will ever take me seriously again," she whispered to herself in the dark hours of the night. "No one will remember the beautiful Fatima if the world only speaks of Layla." But the true curse of Layla's beauty had yet to reveal itself, a hidden danger, one even Layla herself didn't yet understand, lingered in the shadows, watching, waiting. The village's whispers turned darker, and Layla found herself not adored but shunned, for in this place beauty was not a gift, it was a burden, and one that would unravel a family's fate. Layla had always been different, though she never asked to be. Born into a humble family in the small desert village of Al-Nahar, her life should have been simple, like the lives of all the other girls who spent their days weaving, fetching water, and tending to their homes. Yet, from her earliest years, whispers followed her wherever she went. She was her father's pride and her mother's curse. Abu Omar, a merchant who traveled far beyond the sand dunes to trade goods, often spoke of Layla's beauty with a glimmer in his eyes. "She is like the moon," he would say to the other merchants, boasting with her father's love. "Her light cannot be hidden, even in the darkest night." But for Khadija, Layla's mother, her beauty was a double-edged sword. In a village like ours, Khadija warned her husband, "Beauty is no gift. It is a fire that will burn us all." Layla herself could never understand why her beauty caused so much unrest. She lived a quiet life, staying out of sight when she could, her large almond-shaped eyes always cast downward to avoid the piercing gazes of the villagers. Her mornings were spent weaving intricate patterns on carpets that her father would sell in faraway markets. Her afternoons were filled with tending to her younger brothers, Omar and Rafiq, and helping her mother in the kitchen. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to blend into the background, she always stood out. The village women whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. "A face like hers invites trouble," one would say. "Mark my words, men will fight over her, and blood will stain the sand," another would respond. Even the men in the village avoided her, not out of respect, but out of fear. In a society where honor was sacred, Layla's beauty was seen as a threat, a temptation that could destroy families and tarnish reputations. "Keep your distance," they would tell their sons. "A girl like her is nothing but trouble." Despite the whispers, Layla's heart remained kind. She adored her brothers, who saw her as more than the source of the family's unease. Omar, the elder, would often sneak her dried dates and sit beside her under the shade of the date palm trees, sharing stories of their father's travels. "One day, Layla," he would say, "will leave this place, and no one will whisper about you anymore." Her younger brother Rafiq was her shadow. Only 7 years old, he followed her wherever she went, clutching her hand with a fierce loyalty that melted her heart. "You're my favorite, Layla," he would say with the innocence only a child could muster. In those moments, Layla felt loved, protected even, as though the weight of her beauty could be lessened by their affection. But not everyone in her family shared this love. Her aunt, Fatima, had always harbored a deep jealousy toward Layla. Once considered the most beautiful woman in the family, Fatima's bitterness grew as the villagers began comparing her fading looks to Layla's youthful glow. "Beauty fades," Fatima would say sharply whenever the topic of Layla arose. "And when it does, what will she have left?" But her words held more venom than concern. Fatima's envy simmered beneath her surface like the coals of a dying fire, waiting for the right moment to ignite. Layla's closest friend, if she could call her that, was a girl named Amina, whose plain features and modest demeanor had always been her greatest shield. Amina was fiercely loyal, but often resentful of the attention Layla received, even if it was negative. "Do you ever wish you were normal?" Amina asked one day, as they sat by the well, the setting sun casting long shadows over the village. Layla looked at her friend and sighed. Every day. Despite her beauty, Layla felt a profound loneliness. She often wondered if she was cursed. Was it her fault that her face drew so much attention? She would stare at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror her father had brought back from one of his journeys, searching for the flaw that everyone seemed to see in her. But all she saw was a girl desperate to be left alone. As the years passed, the whispers turned into accusations. One day, a young man named Yusuf, a shepherd from the neighboring village, came to Al-Nahar seeking Layla's hand in marriage. When she politely refused, chaos erupted. "She thinks she is too good for us," the villagers said. "She will bring dishonor to her family." The rejection fueled the gossip, and soon Layla's name was spoken with disdain. Her father tried to defend her, but even his voice began to waver under the weight of the village's judgment. "Perhaps it's time we sent her away," Khadija whispered one night, her voice heavy with guilt. "Let her live with my sister in the city. She'll be safer there." But Layla knew the truth. There was no escaping her beauty, no running from the shadow it cast. And as she lay awake at night, listening to the wind howling through the cracks in their home, she couldn't shake the feeling that her story was just beginning, that the whispers would soon turn into something far darker. It was on the morning of the village's annual festival that the first real crack in Layla's world appeared, a crack that would quickly widen into a chasm, pulling her deeper into a storm she had never anticipated. The festival, held each year to celebrate the harvest, was a day of joy, of music and dance, of feasts and laughter. But for Layla, it had become a day of dread, the one day when her beauty would be paraded as a curse in front of the entire village. Her mother, Khadija, always insisted on dressing her in the finest clothes for the occasion, bright, intricate fabrics, embroidered with gold thread. It was an attempt to assert some control over the situation, to display Layla's beauty as a trophy, not a burden. But Layla knew better. The moment she stepped into the crowded streets, she would feel the eyes, those sharp, calculating gazes that would follow her every step, whispering, judging, and condemning her. This year, however, something was different. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the village in a harsh, golden light, Layla tried to disappear into the background as best as she could. She helped her mother with the preparations for the feast, weaving baskets and arranging dates and figs, pretending the festival was just another day. She wasn't ready to face the stares of the villagers, especially those of Yusuf, who had yet to recover from her rejection months earlier. The sight of him always made her uncomfortable, but today his presence felt unbearable. The streets were lined with colorful lanterns, and the sounds of drums and flutes echoed from every corner. The villagers were in high spirits, but Layla remained distant, watching from the shadows as the festivities unfolded. It was when the dancing began that everything changed. The music swelled and the men and women of the village began to dance in a circle, clapping and singing. Layla stood near the edge, as she always did, her eyes cast downward. Her brothers were somewhere in the crowd, and her parents were too caught up in the celebration to notice her retreat. It was then that a figure stepped into her line of sight, Fatima, her aunt. The woman who had always been too proud to speak of her envy openly, but whose animosity had long been a silent weight on Layla's chest. Fatima's lips curled into a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Layla," she said, her voice sweet with an undertone of something darker. "Join us. Come. Let the village see you shine." For a moment, Layla hesitated. She didn't want to be the center of attention. Not now, not ever. But Fatima's insistence was impossible to refuse, and with a resigned sigh, Layla stepped forward into the circle. As she moved, the crowd parted like the sea, leaving a wide space for her to enter. The music faltered for a moment, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of expectation. Layla could feel the eyes on her, their gazes like needles, piercing through the thin veil of her composure. She forced herself to smile, as she had been taught to do, her hands nervously adjusting the fabric of her dress. The women around her clapped, but the men, especially Yusuf, watched her in silence, their eyes unreadable. For the briefest moment, everything felt suspended in time. Layla twirled, her movements graceful and controlled, her heart pounding in her chest. But it didn't take long for the cracks in her carefully maintained facade to begin to show. She could feel the weight of their judgment, the way the men's eyes followed every movement, and the way some of the women exchanged glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Then, just as quickly as the moment began, it ended. A loud, sharp voice broke through the air. "That's enough!" The crowd fell silent, the music cutting off abruptly. Everyone turned toward the source of the voice, a figure stepping out from the shadows at the far end of the square. It was Jamil, a wealthy merchant from a neighboring town, known for his arrogance and the large estate he owned on the outskirts of the village. He was a man who had come to visit many times before, and his reputation was as grand as his wealth. But on this day, there was something in his eyes, a dangerous gleam that sent a shiver through Layla's spine. Jamil's gaze fixed directly on Layla, and she froze. There was something predatory in the way he looked at her, something that made her skin crawl. "You all should be ashamed," he called out to the gathered crowd. "Shamed for letting such a thing be paraded before us. This girl, this beauty, is nothing but a temptation, a curse on this village." A murmur spread through the crowd, the tension rising like a tide. Layla's heart raced, her breath coming in shallow gasps. What was he saying? "This girl," Jamil continued, stepping forward with the confidence of a man who had never been questioned, "will ruin us all. A woman like this, too beautiful for her own good, will bring shame to this village." Layla's chest tightened. The weight of the words seemed to hang in the air, suffocating her. She wanted to run to escape the eyes that had never stopped following her, but her feet felt glued to the ground. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Beauty is a curse." "She is a danger to all of us," Jamil added, his voice growing more forceful. "I propose that we send her away, before the darkness she brings spreads to us all." The crowd was silent. The men exchanged uneasy glances while the women looked down, unable to meet Layla's gaze. The air felt thick with accusation, with betrayal. Layla's world, the delicate balance she had tried so hard to maintain, was unraveling before her eyes. And then, in a moment of clarity, Layla understood. This wasn't about her beauty. It never had been. It was about control. It was about power. They wanted to silence her, to rid themselves of the threat she represented. The villagers feared what she could become, not for who she was, but for what she symbolized, a force they couldn't contain, a beauty they couldn't tame. The festival that was supposed to celebrate the harvest became the moment that changed Layla's life forever. The crowd, once full of joy, was now charged with an undercurrent of fear and resentment. She was no longer just a girl. She was a symbol of something dangerous, something that could destroy them all. And in the cold, hard silence that followed Jamil's words, Layla felt it, the crushing weight of the village's rejection. For the first time, she realized there was no escape. No matter how much she tried to hide, no matter how hard she tried to live a simple, quiet life, she was destined to be a target. And the path ahead of her, dark and uncertain, had just become a terrifying reality. The following days after the festival were filled with a tension so thick that it seemed to hang in the air, like the oppressive heat of the desert sun. Layla could feel it, that gnawing sense of dread that had settled deep in her chest, pressing down on her heart with every passing moment. The words of Jamil had haunted her, following her wherever she went. "She will ruin us all." It wasn't just the shame of being publicly humiliated, it was the sudden realization that the village had made her an outcast, marked her as something dangerous. No longer just the subject of idle gossip, she had become the embodiment of a threat in their eyes, a threat that needed to be silenced. In the days that followed, the whispers grew louder. The village women avoided her. They no longer exchanged kind words as they once had, now only offering the occasional side glance or a cold, dismissive nod. The men, once uncomfortable but respectful, now looked at her with open suspicion. She caught them eyeing her from the corners of their eyes as she walked past, and the burden of their gaze was almost unbearable. Her family, too, had begun to treat her differently. Her father, Abu Omar, who had once proudly spoken of her beauty, no longer did. He grew quieter, more withdrawn, as if the very air around him had turned oppressive. Khadija had become more distant, her eyes filled with worry and fear, her words now laced with caution. "You should have listened," her mother had said one night, her voice strained. "Beauty is a gift, but it can also be a curse. I told you this would happen." But it was her uncle, Hassan, who saw the situation for what it truly was. Unlike the other men, who had been swayed by the words of Jamil, Hassan had always viewed the world with a deeper understanding, his wisdom earned through years of hardship and travel. He had been one of the few in the village who truly saw Layla for who she was, a girl caught in the crossfire of others' desires and fears. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Hassan came to visit. His presence was a rare occurrence, as he had been away for many years, but the moment he entered their humble home, Layla could feel the difference. There was a quiet authority about him, a presence that filled the room with a sense of calm, despite the storm swirling outside. "Layla," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in days. "You cannot hide from what is happening. The village is already turning against you, and there will be no peace for you here unless you face the truth." Layla's heart sank. "What truth?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You need to leave," Hassan said, his voice steady but urgent. "You are no longer safe here. Jamil has turned everyone against you. He will not stop until he has destroyed you." Layla shook her head in disbelief. "But where will I go? I have nothing." "That's not true," Hassan replied. "You have me, and I know someone who can help." Layla stared at him, confused. "Who?" "A friend of mine," he said, lowering his voice as if to keep the information from prying ears. "A merchant in the city. He owes me a favor. I can arrange for you to stay with him, far away from here, where you will be free from the gossip and the danger. But you must act quickly. The longer you stay, the more likely it is that you will be caught in the web of lies they've spun around you." The decision, though difficult, was made for her. Layla knew there was no future for her in Al-Nahar, not anymore. If she stayed, she would only be the subject of cruelty and hatred, a prisoner in her own home. Her family could not protect her, and even if they tried, their efforts would be futile against the collective will of the village. But to leave meant stepping into the unknown, a world full of uncertainty and danger. She didn't know what lay ahead, only that she had to escape. The next few days passed in a blur. Hassan made the arrangements, securing a place for Layla in the bustling city of Al-Qamar, a distant urban center known for its markets and merchants. He promised to take her there himself, and before she knew it, Layla found herself standing at the edge of the village, her bags packed, and her heart heavy with fear and longing. "Don't look back," Hassan advised her as they began their journey, his tone firm but gentle. "You are not running away, Layla. You are moving towards something better." But no matter how much he tried to reassure her, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving behind more than just her home. She was leaving everything she had ever known: the faces of her brothers, the comfort of her father's smile, the familiar paths through the village. And yet, there was a part of her that felt a strange sense of relief. She was free from the stares, free from the expectations of a village that had already condemned her. She would have a chance to start anew, to become something more than the girl with the dangerous beauty. The journey was long, and the road stretched out before them like a never-ending ribbon of dust and sand. But as they neared the city, Layla's heart began to beat faster, her excitement mingling with fear. The world beyond Al-Nahar was vast and unknown, and while it held promise, it also held danger. She was still a young girl, with no experience in the ways of the world, and her beauty, while it had brought nothing but pain in the village, would likely attract just as much attention in the city. They arrived at Al-Qamar just before sunset, the city's skyline a jagged outline against the golden sky. The bustling streets were filled with people from all walks of life, merchants hawking their wares, traders from distant lands exchanging goods, and men and women moving quickly through the crowds, each of them consumed by their own lives. It was nothing like the quiet, isolated village of Al-Nahar. Hassan led her to a large, stately house near the market, where she would be safe for the time being. The merchant who had agreed to help them, a man named Rashid, was a middle-aged man of average build, with sharp eyes and a welcoming smile. He had the air of someone who had seen it all and knew how to navigate the treacherous waters of the city's elite. He took one look at Layla and immediately offered her a place to stay, though his eyes held a trace of curiosity that Layla couldn't quite decipher. "You're safe here," Rashid assured her, but there was a subtle weight in his words. "But remember, nothing is ever as it seems. The city may offer you freedom, but it also demands a price. Keep your wits about you." That night, Layla lay in a bed far more comfortable than anything she had ever known. She stared at the ceiling, the flickering shadows from the lantern dancing on the walls. Her mind raced, torn between relief and uncertainty. She had escaped the village, but she could feel the weight of her past pressing down on her. Jamil's words still echoed in her ears, and the thought of what might be waiting for her in the city, this strange, bustling place, left her feeling more uncertain than ever. She had left Al-Nahar, but the journey was far from over. The days in Al-Qamar blended into one another, each as unfamiliar and unsettling as the last. Layla tried to adjust to her new life, but the shadows of her past, the whispers of Al-Nahar, seemed to follow her everywhere. Rashid's home, though large and beautiful, felt like a gilded cage, safe, yet confining. The walls seemed to close in on her with every passing day, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her every move, her every word was scrutinized, and the sense of being an outsider, an intruder in someone else's world, weighed heavily on her. Despite Rashid's reassurances, the city felt cold and indifferent. The bustling markets and crowded streets seemed so far removed from the simplicity of her village life. There was no warmth here, no familiarity, only strangers who passed by without a second glance. She felt like a ghost, unseen and unnoticed, a far cry from the girl she had once been, the girl who was the talk of every town she visited. In Al-Nahar, her beauty had been both a blessing and a curse, but in Al-Qamar it seemed like a distant memory, like something that no longer mattered. One evening, as she sat on the balcony of Rashid's home, gazing out over the sprawling city, a knock on the door shattered the silence. She didn't expect visitors, especially not at this hour. Rashid had already retired for the night, leaving Layla to her own thoughts. But curiosity got the better of her, and she made her way to the door, her foot stepping quickly, but the steps came halting. When she opened it, standing there was a figure she had never seen before. A woman, cloaked in black, with a veil covering her face, obscuring all but her eyes. Her gaze was sharp, penetrating, as if she could see straight through Layla's soul. The woman's presence sent a chill down Layla's spine, though she couldn't explain why. "You don't know me," the woman said, her voice low and melodic, yet carrying an undertone of urgency. "But I know you, Layla." Layla froze, unsure of how to respond. "Who are you?" The woman stepped closer, her eyes scanning Layla's face. "I'm someone who's been watching you ever since you arrived here." Her voice was calm, but there was a sharpness in her tone that hinted at something more. "And I'm here because I have something you need to hear." Layla's heart began to race. Who was this woman? How did she know her name? "You need to be careful," the woman continued. "You think you've escaped your past, but it's following you. The people of Al-Nahar, they're not done with you." Layla's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about? I left that life behind." The woman nodded slowly, as if she had anticipated the response. "You may have left Al-Nahar, but they haven't forgotten you. Jamil, he's searching for you, and he won't stop until he finds you. You are not safe here, not in this city. And worse, you've been marked by something far more dangerous than gossip and shame. There are forces at work here, Layla, forces you cannot begin to understand." The woman's words sent a wave of panic crashing over Layla. She stumbled back, her mind racing to make sense of what was happening. "What do you mean, forces at work? What do you want from me?" The woman hesitated, her gaze dropping for a brief moment before she locked eyes with Layla again. "I don't want anything from you. I'm trying to save you." Layla swallowed hard, still in disbelief. "Save me from what? I left. I thought I was free." The woman's lips curled into a small, grim smile. "You don't know everything, do you? You think Jamil's anger was just about your beauty, about his jealousy, but there's more to it, Layla. You've been caught in something far larger than yourself. You're a pawn in a game, and the stakes are higher than you realize." Layla's mind was reeling. Her entire world, which had felt so secure just days ago, was starting to unravel before her eyes. "What game? What are you talking about?" Before the woman could answer, a voice from behind Layla made her jump. "Who are you?" Rashid had emerged from the shadows of the hallway, his expression unreadable. He had been watching the exchange from a distance, and Layla could see the tension in his posture. The woman glanced at him and then back at Layla, her eyes narrowing. "You're not who you say you are," she said, her tone now filled with something sharper, something darker. "You've been hiding the truth from her, Rashid." Layla's heart sank. "What truth?" Rashid stepped forward, his face tight with a mixture of anger and frustration. "It's time, Layla, time you knew everything." The woman's words had struck a chord, but Layla still couldn't understand what was happening. She turned to Rashid, her confusion mounting. "Rashid, what is she talking about? What truth? Who are you?" Rashid let out a heavy sigh, his gaze filled with regret. He looked older in that moment, burdened by something heavy. "Layla, I didn't want you to find out this way, but there's no turning back now. I wasn't just helping you out of kindness. I'm involved in this too. I've been a part of something much larger than you think." Layla felt a sharp pang of betrayal. "What do you mean? What have you been hiding from me?" Rashid stepped closer, his voice low and strained. "The people of Al-Nahar, Jamil, your father, your uncle, they're not the only ones who wanted you gone. There's a group, a secret organization that has been watching you for years, and they've been waiting for the right moment to make their move. Your beauty, your lineage, Layla, they want it, they need it, and they will stop at nothing to take it from you." The revelation hit Layla like a tidal wave. She had thought that escaping to the city would bring her peace, but it had only drawn her deeper into a web of lies and deceit. Everything she had known, everything she had trusted, was falling apart. The man she had come to see as a protector, Rashid, was no different from the people who had betrayed her in Al-Nahar, and now she was caught in the midst of a sinister conspiracy. one that threatened to destroy her, body and soul. But even as the truth crashed down on her, Lila knew there was no turning back. The choice had been made. She was no longer just running from her past. She was fighting for her survival. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the weight of the truth that had finally come to light. Lila's world, once so stable, now teetered on the edge of collapse. Rashid's confession had shattered everything she thought she knew about him, about her life. The city of Al-Qamar, once a place of hope and new beginnings, had turned into a maze of shadows and deception. But this was not the time for fear or hesitation. In the deepest part of her heart, Layla knew what she had to do. She had been running her entire life, running from the village, from Jamil, from her own identity. But now, the time had come to stop running. It was time to face the darkness head-on. Layla stood in the grand hall of Rashid's house, her hands trembling but her resolve unshaken. Rashid, still grappling with the weight of his own confession, stood before her, his eyes pleading, as though hoping she would somehow understand. But there was no understanding left. The truth had been laid bare, and Layla knew that no more lies could bind her. "You told me you wanted to protect me," Layla said, her voice low but filled with a cold fury. "But you were never protecting me, were you? You were just another part of the plan, another puppet in their game." Rashid opened his mouth to speak, but she raised a hand, silencing him. "I've heard enough." The woman who had warned her, the mysterious figure from the shadows, was still in the house, waiting, watching. Layla had learned from her, just enough to understand the stakes. The organization Rashid was involved with, the group that had been after her since her childhood, was not just some criminal syndicate. It was something older, deeper. A faction with its roots in ancient history, connected to powerful families and rulers who would stop at nothing to control the future. And Layla was their key. Her beauty, her lineage, everything about her was a symbol of power, a symbol that had been coveted for generations. But now, Layla understood that they weren't after her as a person. They were after her as a symbol of their authority, their right to rule. It was never about love or betrayal, it was about control. "Tell me the truth, Rashid," Layla demanded, her voice stronger now. "What is it that you're really a part of?" Rashid's face paled, and for a moment Layla saw the man she had once trusted, the man she had thought she could rely on, crack under the weight of his own guilt. He turned away, unable to look her in the eye. "I'm part of an ancient order," he whispered. "We've been watching you for years. Your family, your bloodline, holds the key to something much greater than you can imagine." Layla's heart raced. "What key? What do you mean?" Rashid hesitated, then took a deep breath, turning back to face her. "You're not just any woman, Layla. You are the last of a bloodline that can change the course of history. You hold the key to an ancient power that has been sought after for centuries, and the group I belong to, they will stop at nothing to claim it, even if it means using you as their pawn." Layla's mind whirled with this revelation. She had always felt different, like she didn't quite belong in the world around her. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. The weight of her lineage, of her very existence, was a burden she had never asked for. It wasn't just about beauty or status. It was about power, about control over something far more dangerous than she could understand. "And you knew all this, Rashid?" Layla's voice trembled with anger and disbelief. "You knew and you still chose to deceive me? You still chose to use me?" Rashid nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. "I never wanted to deceive you, Layla. But I was bound by an oath, by duty. I didn't have a choice. They control everything: money, power, influence. I thought if I stayed in their good graces, I could protect you. I thought I could stop them from hurting you. But I was wrong. I was just a part of their plan." Layla's hands balled into fists. "Well, it's too late for that now." The air grew heavier, the room darker. as the weight of their conversation hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Layla turned away from him, her mind racing. The truth had been laid bare. She could no longer rely on anyone, least of all Rashid. He had betrayed her, lied to her, and used her. The man she had trusted, the man she had once thought could protect her, was now just another obstacle in her path. But even in her anger, Layla knew one thing. She had to face this head-on. She could no longer run. Not from the past, not from the forces that had hunted her, not from the truth of her own bloodline. It was time to take control. "I'm not going to let them take me," she said, her voice filled with newfound strength. "I'm not going to let anyone control me, not anymore." Before Rashid could speak again, a sound echoed from the hallway, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Layla's heart skipped a beat. She turned sharply toward the door, instinctively sensing that something was coming. In that moment, she knew that whatever was about to happen would change everything. The door slammed open and a group of masked figures poured into the room. Layla's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the man who stepped forward. Jamil. "You thought you could escape," Jamil sneered, his eyes filled with malice. "But you belong to us, Layla. You always have. And now, you're going to pay the price for thinking you could run away." Rashid stepped forward, trying to intervene, but Jamil held up a hand to stop him. "No, Rashid," he said coldly. "You've already failed. She's ours now." Layla's heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit her. They had been watching her all along. There was no escape, no safe haven. She had been their target from the very beginning. But in that moment, something inside Layla clicked. The power, the control. They wanted to take everything from her. But she was done being a pawn. She was done being a victim. With a defiant stare, she stood tall, facing Jamil and the group that surrounded her. "You think you control me?" she said, her voice unwavering. "You don't. Not anymore." The room grew tense, the air thick with the anticipation of what was to come. But for the first time in her life, Layla felt in control. She had uncovered the truth, and now it was her turn to decide what would happen next. The room, once filled with tense anticipation, was now unnervingly quiet. The weight of Layla's defiance hung heavily in the air, filling the space with an unspoken challenge. Jamil's eyes narrowed, his cold gaze fixed on her. But Layla remained unmoving, unbroken, her heart pounding with adrenaline and a newfound sense of purpose. The truth of who she was, what she had become, had finally settled into her bones, and she was not going to let it be taken from her so easily. The masked figures around her tensed, sensing her change. There was no fear in her stance, only resolve. This was no longer about escaping. This was about reclaiming control. She had spent too long running, hiding in the shadows of her own power, but now she was standing at the precipice, ready to leap into the unknown. Jamil, the man who had once promised her safety, who had spoken of love and protection, now stood as her adversary. The cruel twist of fate had exposed the truth. Their connection was never built on love but on power, manipulation, and deception. His role in the grand scheme, his part in the game they had been playing, was clear to her now. She wasn't just another pawn to be moved. She was the queen of a game she hadn't even known she was playing. And Jamil? He was simply another player trying to take what he thought was his. "You can't stop this, Layla," Jamil said, his voice low and dangerous. "You were always meant to fall in line. You can't escape your destiny." Layla's eyes remained unwavering. "My destiny is not something you or anyone else can decide for me," she replied, her voice calm but sharp. "I've lived under the illusion of being controlled for too long. I won't live that way anymore." Jamil's lips curled into a cruel smile. "You don't have a choice. We're not done with you yet. You can't run from your bloodline. You can't run from us." Layla's pulse quickened as the tension escalated, but she held her ground. The masked figures surrounding her were closing in, their presence suffocating. They were trying to intimidate her, to break her resolve, but Layla had made up her mind. She wouldn't be controlled. Not by Jamil, not by Rashid, not by anyone. The figures stepped closer, their eyes burning with the same cold ambition. But in the midst of the impending chaos, something unexpected happened. "Enough!" a commanding voice rang out from the doorway. Everyone froze. The voice was calm, authoritative, but there was something else, something deeply unsettling about it. Layla's heart skipped as her eyes darted toward the door, where a figure stood silhouetted against the light. The silhouette was unmistakable. It was Rashid. Layla's mind raced. What was he doing here? He had just betrayed her, revealed the truth behind his role in her life. He was part of the game, the same game that had ensnared her. So why was he here now at the moment when everything was on the line? Rashid stepped forward, his face unreadable. His eyes flickered to Jamil, then to Layla, and for the briefest moment she saw a flash of regret in his expression, a fleeting moment of vulnerability before the walls came crashing down again. "I know what you've done, Rashid," Layla said, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of her fury. "I know what you've been hiding, what you've been a part of." Rashid's expression didn't waver. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I thought I could protect you. I thought I could control it. But I was wrong. This has gone too far." Layla felt a flicker of something, a spark of hope maybe, before quickly smothering it. She had no more room for half-truths, for people who claimed to love her only to betray her when the stakes grew too high. Still, something in his voice made her pause. She had to know what was happening now, what was about to unfold. "What are you saying, Rashid?" she demanded. He looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw a deep and painful truth. "I'm saying that I've made a choice, and this time it's my choice. I'm not going to let them take you. I'm not going to let them control us." Layla's heart clenched as she realized what was happening. Rashid was no longer the man she had once known. He had crossed a line. And yet now, in the wake of his own mistakes, he was trying to save her. His path had been paved with mistakes, betrayal, and regret. But now, he was taking a stand. Not for the group, not for the power, but for her. The tension in the room shifted, the air heavy with a different kind of anticipation. Jamil's face twisted in anger and disbelief, his grip tightening on the hilt of his sword. "You've betrayed us, Rashid," he growled. "You're nothing to us now. You're just as much of a traitor as she is." Rashid didn't flinch. "Do what you must, Jamil," he said quietly, "but I will no longer stand by your side." There was a long silence. The weight of those words was almost unbearable. For the first time, the two men stood on opposite sides. Rashid's betrayal had shattered the alliance they once had, and now it was a battle for control over Layla, the very thing they had fought for from the start. Layla looked between Rashid and Jamil, feeling the unbearable pressure of the moment. But then, as if the weight of it all was too much to bear, the truth finally hit her. She was no longer caught between two men. She wasn't the pawn in their game. She was the one who held the cards. "Enough!" Layla shouted, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "This ends now. You don't control me. None of you do." She took a deep breath, her chest heaving with the weight of the moment. "I will decide my own fate, and if I have to fight to get it, so be it." The silence that followed was deafening. It was as if the world itself had stopped spinning, holding its breath to see what would happen next. Rashid's gaze softened slightly, but Jamil's eyes blazed with fury. The masked figures behind him seemed to hesitate, unsure of which side to take. Then, as if on cue, the door to the room flung open again, and another figure entered, this time a woman. "Layla," the woman said, her voice calm but laced with authority. "It's time." The woman was familiar. Layla had seen her before, in the shadows, always watching, but now she saw her clearly. The woman was part of the faction, part of the group that had been hunting Layla for so long. And yet, there was something different about her. Her eyes held a depth that Layla couldn't quite place. "It's time for you to decide, Layla," the woman said, stepping forward. "The future is in your hands now." Layla felt the weight of the decision ahead of her, and for the first time in her life she understood. The fate of everyone in this room, perhaps even the future of their world, would be shaped by the choices she made now. The power had always been hers, waiting to be claimed. And with that, the final step of her journey began. The quiet of the desert night was a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed Layla's life in the days leading to this moment. The air was cool, the stars above like scattered jewels in the infinite sky, and for the first time in what felt like years, she could breathe freely. The confrontation with Jamil and Rashid had ended, not with bloodshed, but with clarity. When the dust had settled, Layla had stood her ground, not as a pawn, but as a woman who had reclaimed her power. She had spoken with conviction, laying bare the truths she had uncovered, not only about her lineage, but about the flawed systems and dangerous ambitions that had sought to control her. Jamil had been taken by the very faction he once sought to lead, his betrayal of their ideals becoming his downfall. Rash, broken by his own mistakes, had left quietly, offering her no more excuses or explanations. His part in her story was over, and though Layla did not forgive him fully, she understood his choices. His regret was his burden to carry, not hers. And the mysterious woman, the one who had appeared in the darkest moments to guide her, she had left with only a few parting words. "You've proven yourself, Layla. Your strength is yours alone. Use it wisely." Now, as she sat beneath the stars, her thoughts drifted back to the village of Al-Nahar, the place where her story had begun. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had been the quiet, isolated girl shunned for her beauty. The whispers of the villagers, the scorn in their eyes, had once defined her world. But now, those whispers seemed so small, so insignificant, in the face of everything she had endured and learned. "They feared me because they didn't understand me," Layla murmured to herself, her voice barely audible over the gentle breeze. They feared what they couldn't control. It was a hard truth to accept, but it was also liberating. Her beauty, her lineage, her strength, they had all been used against her, turned into weapons by others. But now, they were hers to wield, not as tools of destruction, but as a means to build something new. Her mind turned to the lessons she had learned along the way, the pain and betrayal that had shaped her. She had seen the worst of humanity, greed, jealousy, and the hunger for power, but she had also seen resilience, courage, and the capacity for change. Even Rashid, flawed as he was, had shown her that redemption was possible, that people were not defined solely by their mistakes. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Layla rose to her feet. The desert stretched out before her, vast and empty, yet full of promise. She had a choice now, a freedom she had never known before. The world was no longer a prison. It was an open expanse, waiting for her to carve her own path. Her journey had taught her many things, but the most important lesson was this: she was more than the labels others had placed on her. Her beauty, her lineage, her power, none of it defined her. What defined her was her spirit, her courage to face the unknown, and her refusal to be silenced. There was a future ahead of her, one that she would shape with her own hands. She didn't know where the road would lead, but she knew this: she was no longer afraid. She had faced the darkness and come out stronger, and now she was ready to embrace whatever came next. The life lesson she carried with her was clear. True power comes not from what others give you, but from what you claim for yourself. And freedom is not given, it is fought for, earned, and cherished. With the sun rising behind her, Layla walked toward the horizon, her head held high. The world was hers now, and she was ready to meet it. Not as a girl shunned for her beauty, but as a woman who had found her strength. And in the quiet of the desert dawn, she smiled. A small, knowing smile that spoke of resilience, of courage, and of the unshakable belief that she was finally, truly free.